What if I told you the hotel industry was quietly reinvented by 3 roommates, a few blow-up mattresses, and a desperate design conference? Welcome to Unboxd Origins. I'm Howie, your resident science geek and accidental trivia sponge.
And I'm Wyatt. I ask the big questions. Sometimes philosophical, often skeptical, always curious.
Today, we're digging into how did Airbnb transform the hospitality industry? Let's start at the cramped, frankly bohemian roots. It's 2007 in San Francisco. Rent is high, techies are everywhere, and a design conference floods the city with visitors. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, 2 designers who were roommates and totally broke, hit a classic startup problem. They can't pay the rent. Their solution was gloriously simple and a bit desperate. Inflate a few air mattresses, offer the mattresses in their apartment, plus home-cooked breakfast, and call it AirBed Breakfast. 3 guests stayed that weekend. The idea wasn't just to make money, it was a human-scale experiment. Could strangers trade space for hospitality? Could a spare room be a product? After that weekend, the story followed the startup script, at least the honest, messy version. They built a simple website, and Nathan Blakarczyk joined as the technical co-founder and engineer to turn the idea into a platform. The team iterated obsessively. The site went from a quirky listing board to a searchable marketplace. But iteration alone doesn't create new industries. 2 things did. 1, the platform solved 2 sticky technical problems: supply discovery and secure payments at scale. And 2, it built social trust into engineering. Reviews, verified profiles, messaging between host and guest, and later integrated payments and the host guarantee created a feedback loop. Hosts who did well, rated well. Guests who respected homes gained reputations. This network effect, more listings attract more guests attract more listings, is the engine of marketplaces. Airbnb's early triumph was engineering that engine and then standing back while millions of people added rooms, apartments, tree houses, and castles to the inventory. But it wasn't smooth sailing. Scaling hospitality doesn't just scale code, it scales people and politics. Local laws and hotel lobbies noticed rooms disappearing from long-term rental markets and reappearing as short-term listings. Cities like New York, Barcelona, and Berlin began to regulate short-term rentals, citing housing shortages and city character. There were also trust failures, sensational incidents, parties gone wrong, thefts, safety scares, grabbed headlines, and seeded skepticism. Airbnb responded by layering on policies: the host guarantee, not a replacement for homeowners' insurance, identity verification measures, insurance-like protections, and expanded customer support. They hired lobbyists and litigators, invested in public policy and community teams, signed data sharing and tax collection agreements with some cities, and built tools to help hosts register and comply. In short, Airbnb learned the painful lesson that creating a new kind of lodging meant navigating politics, safety, and property law as much as writing better search code.
Aha! Here's the twist people often miss. Airbnb's true innovation wasn't primarily about lodging at all. It was a productized trust engine that turned private assets into commercial supply without owning them. Think about traditional hotels. They own, staff, and operate property. Airbnb built the infrastructure to aggregate privately owned spaces into a single usable inventory. And crucially, they convinced millions of travelers and, in some places, regulators and neighbors to accept those spaces as valid alternatives to hotels, though many cities resisted and continue to regulate aggressively. That required cultural change as much as technical change. Airbnb didn't invent room rental. It invented the expectation that a stranger's living room could reliably be a safe, reviewable, bookable product. In other words, Airbnb transformed hospitality, not by building a chain of hotels, but by changing what counts as hospitality in the eyes of millions.
That is exactly the aha. Practically, that meant product features that look mundane but are revolutionary in combination. Identity verification, robust photo standards, instant booking, calendar sync, frictionless payments, and layered reputational systems. Think of it like an experiment in social physics. Turn discrete private nodes, homes, into a cohesive mesh by adding trust signals and matching algorithms. The data this created was powerful. Airbnb could analyze what cities needed which kinds of listings, test pricing dynamics, and optimize search results. Hosts began to professionalize. Some owners intentionally converted properties into small hospitality businesses, replicating hotel efficiency. Better photos, keyless entry, cleaning workflows, and even professional management companies. Meanwhile, many hosts remained casual, a spare room for extra cash, or a guest room they used occasionally. The hybrid nature of the supply, part business, part personal, is what made the market porous and explosive. Then came scale, and with scale, both economic and cultural impacts. Travelers discovered that staying in neighborhoods rather than tourist districts changed the way we experience cities. A night in someone's apartment could feel like living in a neighborhood rather than checking into a sterile chain hotel. This pushed the industry toward experience-driven travel. Hotels responded in two main ways. They improved their product and they lobbied. Many hotel chains and hospitality companies launched apartment-style offerings or acquired home rental brands. For example, some groups later offered branded home rental products. Others leaned into consistency and safety as their brand promises. Lobbying efforts led to regulations that, in some cities, capped the number of nights a listing could be rented or required registration and taxation. The impact on housing markets was complex. In some locations, Airbnb listings tightened long-term rental supply and pushed rents up. In others, hosts supplemented income with short stays while long-term supply remained. Economists and policymakers have debated the size of these effects ever since.
Here's a second aha moment. Airbnb's business model forced us to rethink what operations in hospitality means. Hotels run logistics top-down. Staff schedules, housekeeping, centralized maintenance. Airbnb decentralized these operations, outsourcing them to hosts and third-party management tools. The company created an ecosystem, cleaning services that specialize in turnovers, software for pricing and calendar management, photographers who know the platform's aesthetic, and legal firms that specialize in local rental laws. What started as a peer-to-peer play seeded an entire industry of service providers. So, Airbnb didn't just provide rooms, it created a market for the people and services that make short-term renting scalable. That's a subtle but monumental shift from owning operations to orchestrating an ecosystem.
And there's the brand expansion. Airbnb moved beyond beds and started selling experiences, guided walks, cooking classes, music nights, tapping into the zeitgeist of experiential travel. They also experimented with luxury, Airbnb Luxe, business travel tools, and long-term stays responding to remote work trends. The COVID-19 pandemic was a brutal stress test. Travel plummeted, but remote work accelerated uptake of longer stays. Airbnb pivoted marketing toward longer stays and remote work messaging, and saw a rise in rural and suburban bookings as travelers sought space and safety. This adaptability proved the platform's resilience. It wasn't just about short weekend bookings in cities. It was about reconfiguring how we use space when the rules of work and travel change. Of course, growth led to an inevitable corporate milestone, an IPO in late 2020. Going public turned Airbnb into a different animal. Shareholders, public scrutiny, quarterly results. Yet the company's public filing underscored the original thesis. It's a platform that connects hosts and guests and takes a fee. That simple model is ruthlessly scalable if you can maintain trust, compliance, and supply diversity. Post-IPO, Airbnb has had to contend with professionalization of hosts. Some multi-listing operations resemble hotel chains more than casual hosts, and with regulators who want clearer rules. The company continues to invest in trust, safety, and public policy while pushing the product into new categories.
So why does this all matter? Because Airbnb changed not only where we sleep, but who can be an economic actor in hospitality. By turning idle assets, a spare room, an unused apartment, into income streams, it democratized lodging entrepreneurship. People in small towns could host guests. City dwellers could monetize their space. That has both empowering and destabilizing effects. Empowering because it lowered the barrier to earning from property. Destabilizing because without careful policy, it can contribute to housing shortages and exacerbate inequality. The contest over Airbnb is really a contest over public space and private gain. Who gets to profit, how cities preserve housing for residents, and how communities maintain character.
Let's also highlight an underappreciated technical effect. Airbnb normalized dynamic pricing and data-driven allocation in lodging. Hosts now use algorithms and third-party tools to set nightly rates based on demand, seasonality, and local events, a practice once largely confined to airlines and big hotels. This pushed hospitality toward yield management and sophisticated revenue systems. The ripple effect reached hotels, which doubled down on loyalty programs and pricing technology, and marketplaces that watched Airbnb's success tried to replicate different elements, trust systems, host support, and frictionless transactions.
One last aha, and then I promise I'll stop philosophizing. Airbnb's social fabric created a new kind of tourism footprint. People staying in residential neighborhoods spread tourism away from congested zones. But they also brought transient populations into everyday streets, sometimes altering neighborhood dynamics. The platform made travel feel more intimate and local. But local communities sometimes pushed back, asking for balance. The net effect? Travel became more integrated with daily life, and that's a profound cultural transformation. Hospitality wasn't only about bricks and concierge desks anymore. It was about shared living and localized experiences.
To sum up, here's the short answer. Airbnb transformed the hospitality industry by turning a set of private living spaces into a globally accessible, trust-enabled marketplace. It did this with smart product design that emphasized reputation and ease, by building a service ecosystem around hosts, and by reshaping traveler expectations toward neighborhood-based, experience-driven stays. It forced hotels to rethink operations and pricing, spurred new regulations, and created economic opportunities and conflicts in city housing markets. It's a case study in how a simple user need, a place to sleep, becomes a platform-level problem once you reframe ownership, trust, and distribution.
And the why it matters takeaway. Because Airbnb shows how platforms can change industries without owning the core asset. They orchestrate value. That orchestration creates opportunities for hosts, for service providers, for travelers, and externalities for residents, regulators, and communities. The genius of Airbnb was less the technology than a cultural and economic reimagining. Hospitality could be distributed, personalized, and dynamic. But that reimagining invites responsibility. Platforms can scale rapidly. Cities and citizens need tools and rules to ensure that scaling doesn't hollow out neighborhoods or shift burdens unfairly.
If you liked this unpacking of Airbnb's story, hit like, subscribe, and share with your curious friends. So how did Airbnb transform the hospitality industry? By turning strangers' spare rooms into a global platform of trust, experiences, and new economic actors. And by forcing us all to rethink what being a host and being a traveler really mean.